Okay, let's start you off with the United Nations nuclear watchdog chief. He has finished a tour of the Fukushima nuclear plant. Rafel Grossi remains unchanged on his stance on the release of treated radioactive water into the sea. China and several Pacific islands still oppose the move. What are the concerns and what impact can release of the water potentially have on the people in the region? More in our next report.
A nod to Japan from the International Atomic Energy Agency to dump water from the wrecked Fukushima nuclear plant into the ocean. The plan is to release more than 1 million metric tons of treated radioactive water. IAEA Chief Rafel Grossi visited the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power station, and this is what he had to say.
I don't see any pending issue. Basically, of course, this is a complex operation, and there might be here and there some minor detail, but by and large, I think that all the basic elements are in place in case the government takes a decision to move forward with this.
The UN says the release meets international nuclear safety standards. Japan's neighbors raise concerns, calling for a more inclusive scientific method, leaving a big question mark on the completion of this gigantic task. The issue has its origins in 2011 in the powerful earthquake and tsunami that hit the Fukushima power plant. Attention had turned to the need to cool the fuel rods attached to the reactors. Japanese authorities used water. Since then, this water has been stored in huge tanks, and the volume of this water is mind-boggling. Enough to fill at least 500 Olympic-sized swimming pools is the estimate. According to the plant's operator TEPCO, plant workers have been filtering the contaminated water to remove isotopes, and the only thing which remains is a radioactive isotope of hydrogen known as tritium. TEPCO will dilute the water until tritium levels fall below regulatory limits. This will be done before the water is released into the Pacific. Tritium is considered a harmless enough element due to its inability to penetrate the human skin, but the concerns remain. A scientific article published in 2014 claims that when ingested, tritium can raise cancer risks. Now this brings us to the next part of our story. Fear among the people in the region has reached a new high, particularly around the aquatic life that may eventually affect humans. Some in South Korea are panic buying salt over fears of contamination after the discharge begins. The fishing communities in Fukushima are worried about the low footfall they will face due to the fear of radioactive substances. International pressure is also mounting. China says Japan cannot use the UN report as a pass to discharge the water. Representatives from the Pacific Islands are also urging Japan to consider the livelihoods the release may affect. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
Okay, well, for more on this, we are joined by Matthew L. Wald, a former policy analyst at the Nuclear Energy Institute, and he's joining us live from Washington, D.C. Matthew, thank you so much for joining us on WION. You know, I was listening to this report, and to a lesser extent, it reminds me of the BP oil spill in Louisiana some years ago, and how the fishermen there were so concerned and the shrimpers were so concerned that despite constant assurances from government officials, their business would be harmed. People would not be buying fish and shrimp and shellfish from that region because they just had this image of the BP oil spill in those waters. And so, you know, these fishermen are now concerned that their business is going to be jeopardized. I mean, is this a valid concern?
Probably not, because tritium is extremely easy to monitor for. All forms of radiation are, and you can look at what you've caught and see. And there's a second part of this, which is tritium is only mildly radioactive, and it does not stay long in the human body or the body of the fish. The amount of tritium being added to the ocean is quite small relative to the amount that's already there. Tritium is created naturally by the interaction of solar radiation and water molecules. Essentially, it takes the hydrogen, the H in H2O, and makes it radioactive. It returns to stability after a few years. But it's not it's not very radioactive. It doesn't stay in the body very long. So it's easy if you look at what you've caught to see if it has a higher tritium level. It will have a tritium level. Tritium is natural. It's always there, but it probably will not be elevated. In fact, it's hard to imagine how it could be elevated. There's tritium all over in the water you drink now, and this is simply the possibility of an addition to that, but it's unlikely to be any kind of addition.
And so, despite the opposition by some, China as well, the government and the plant operator, Tokyo Electric Power Company Holdings, say that ultimately this water has to be removed to prevent any accidental leaks and make room for the plant's decommissioning. So the water staying there and not being released into the sea is also very dangerous.
I think some of the opposition from China and Korea are coming from traditional rivals of Japan. It's based on politics. It's not based on science or health. It's also true that there were a lot of contaminants in the water, but those have been filtered out. The difficulty with tritium is you can't filter it out. It is water. It's a form of water. And I would remind everyone, it's the least hazardous of radionuclides. It leaves the body quickly. It deteriorates later and turns into helium. Nuclear power plants in normal operation release small controlled amounts of tritium. These releases are also controlled. We know what's being released. We know when it's being released. It's not a health threat in normal operation. It's not a health threat now. And eventually you have to release some of this water. In the United States, we don't set limits on tritium except in drinking water. And I should point out, this is going into the ocean, which is not drinking water.
Interesting. Very, very interesting. Thank you so much for that analysis and helping us make sense of this. Matthew Wald, former policy analyst at the Nuclear Energy Institute from Washington, D.C. I look forward to speaking to you again very soon, Matthew. Thanks.
Thank you, Susan.